through the live webcast and also the recording of this event. We'll get started. We at the Writers' House are soon to begin at every event with a long overdue land acknowledgement. We haven't done it. We're trying to work it out. But it seemed especially important and appropriate, given our focus tonight on whether there can be a witness for the witness, and also given our pandemic era sensitivity about spaces where we can gather and be healthy, that we begin that way tonight. So we acknowledge that every gathering of people at the Writers' House does so on the indigenous territory known as Lenape-Hoking, the traditional homelands of the Lenape, also called Lenni Lenape or Delaware Indians. These are the people who, during the 1860s, not too long before the University of Pennsylvania was founded, negotiated with William Penn to facilitate the founding of the colony of Pennsylvania. Their descendants today include the Delaware tribe and Delaware Nation of Oklahoma, and the Nanticoke, Lenni Lenape, Ramapo Lenape, and the Munsee Delaware of Ontario. Tonight we're celebrating the publication of a remarkable book. This is my copy, and we are selling copies. And what you need to do right now, and people who are watching on the webcast need to do the same, but we won't hear you, is put your hands together to celebrate this amazing book and Rachel Zolf, who made this book. So that's where we start. I've read this book now twice, an earlier draft and the text of this beautiful new volume. Rachel reminded me recently that the version that I read earlier was by no means the finished version, and so I'm really glad for that prompt, Rachel Zolf. Thank you. Published by Duke University Press. And I have a keen desire to tell you everything I think and feel about it, but I will confine myself to a praiseful comment or two in a moment. But this event is about conversation. Let me tell you a little bit about how it will happen. I'm very excited about it. Sofia Sears, who is right here, will read for a few minutes after I finish speaking. Sofia is an undergraduate junior at Penn from Los Angeles, majoring in creative writing and gender studies. They have published poetry, creative nonfiction, dramatic work in numerous publications, and they run a queer horror podcast. What's the name of that queer horror podcast?
Called The Final Girl Tapes.
The Final Girl Tapes?
Yeah.
I love it. Sophia will read for a few minutes. After Sophia reads, please come in and have a seat. Welcome. So glad that you came. After Sophia reads, Rachel will come up and give a reading that will last about 30 minutes. After Rachel's reading, Airea Matthews and Rachel both will be on stage together, I guess in these two chairs, for a conversation about No One's Witness, the book that we're talking about, for about 15 minutes, after which Airea will invite members of the audience to ask questions and offer comments. Questions and comments can, of course, come from people gathered here in person in the Writers' House Garden, and also questions conveyed to us. I hope this is, does anybody know how this is happening? Zelda, do you know? Oh, Alley Katz. We'll be looking at the YouTube chat. So those of you who are watching via YouTube, go ahead and chat your comments and questions, and Alley Katz, our program coordinator, will relay some of the questions to the two of them. Airea Matthews has published the book of poems called Simulacra, which won the 2016 Yale Series of Younger Poets Award. Yay, younger poets. She has, I think some snaps are appropriate for that. That's a great thing, achievement. Has received a 2020 Pew Fellowship, 2016 Rona Jaffe Foundation Award, among other awards, prizes, and grants. Everyone who cares about poetry in the Philly region is just continually delighted at the fact that Airea is a member of the faculty at the nearby Bryn Mawr College and that she directs the poetry program there. Yes. After Airea and Rachel converse, and after we've taken some questions from the audience here and from YouTubers everywhere, we will call an end to the formal program. And those of us who are here, sorry, YouTube people, you'll have to snack on your own. We'll hang out here, mingling safely. That was, Julia Block gave me some notes here and put in safely. We need to mingle safely in the garden. Oh, Julia, always thinking about safety. Mingle safely in the garden, which is to say mingle, and the vicinity around here, and enjoy some lovely, another word from Julia or maybe from Allie, pre-packaged snacks. And thanks to Allie Katz, who's right here, and Zach Cardner, who I don't know where he is, and Zelda, who's taking care of the camera, and Jessica Lowenthal, and the aforementioned Julia Block, and a ton of other people for helping us make this event happen. With all respect to all the other programs we've done this semester so far, this is the first major one. This is the first real one where we're all gathered here, we're getting it together, and notwithstanding all the challenges that we face. Yeah, there's some chairs up here. Come on up. Yep, please. There's no, you're fine. You don't want to wait till I'm finished. Rachel Zolf's 5 books of poetry and 6 chapbooks are much, much admired. Tonight we have for sale, I believe, Janie's Arcadia. Do we know that's for sure? Yep. And one of those books, one of those many that I mentioned, and probably Rachel's best-known book, Janie's Arcadia. We also, of course, have copies of the new book, No One's Witness. I'm going to hold it up again. Duke University Press. This book, we have copies. We never make a cent. So whatever we're charging for that book is exactly what we paid for it. They have won many awards and have created art videos that have been screened at venues such as the International Film Festival Rotterdam, the Wexner Center for the Arts, and elsewhere. They hold an MFA from the New School, a PhD in philosophy, art, and social thought from the European School. Rachel spent many years organizing writing projects with trans youth, with incarcerated people, and with many other vulnerable communities. Rachel is now, we are all proud and delighted to say, teaching and working at Penn as artist in residence in the Center for Programs in Contemporary Writing. The book we celebrate tonight does an utterly remarkable thing. I've not read another book quite like it. Maybe the closest I can come from my own reading experience, generically speaking, is Susan Howe's My Emily Dickinson, which is a book-length knowledge assemblage that riffs and ponders and theorizes and historicizes variously around a single poem by Emily Dickinson. This knowledge assemblage, the book we're celebrating tonight, self-conscious in its form as itself an ethics, riffs and ponders and theorizes variously around, really, truly, a single phrase or a line, or actually 3 short lines, written impossibly and almost unutterably by Paul Celan in a poem called Aschenglorie, Ash Glory. Niemand zeugt für den Zeugen. No one witnesses for the witness. How that works, or rather can't work, for English language readers, and frankly, also for German language readers. And for after all, we must remember that Celan, Paul Celan, a survivor of the Nazi Holocaust, moved to Paris, but chose to write his poems in his mother tongue, the language of the people who killed his parents and his friends and his community, chose deliberately to write fearfully and disjunctively with words that could hardly be spoken without trauma. Yes, how that phrase works or doesn't work for readers in any language, I should say, always already having to be translated from the vocabularies of witnessing those who have been erased by racist ideologies enforced by the state, is the very purpose of a book that is always aware and making you as a reader aware of its own no-oneness. What a project, what a feat. No one witnesses for the witness. Rachel Zolf seeks to advocate for and activate that no one. Because no one, capital N-O, new word, capital O-N-E, no one does bear witness in and through a monstrosity that must, of course, be carried along with the language of witnessing, of trying to say what happened in extremis, in extremity, in life in extremity, what happens every day in extremis, even as such witnessing is eroded before our eyes and ears. Nate Mackey wrote Eroding Witness and says, quoting Rachel, quoting Mackey at a key moment in the book, quote, For someone to say that the function of poetry is to simultaneously witness and erode the witness announces a different vocation for poetry. So among the many things that you will want to have or experience when reading this remarkable book is that major thing, a different vocation for poetry. One that matters a great deal. A poetics not merely ornamental or therapeutic or safe haven making, but always, as Rachel puts it, an attempt, a try, a trial, to quote Rachel, a trial that is exposed to its own failure, like all language acts, including, of course, the acts taking place in the writing and for the reader of this book. So before we invite Sofia Sears to come up here and read briefly, and then Rachel and Airea, let's take a moment again to thank and applaud Rachel Zolf for making this try, for making this effort, this remarkable try and trial, Rachel Zolf. Congratulations, Rachel. It is a remarkable book, and if you people don't buy a copy, you're crazy. But that's all right. Sofia, this is Sofia Sears.
Hi, people.
Can you be a little louder?
Yeah, I don't want to. Perfect. Is this good? Yeah. Okay. Hello. My name is Soph. I'd like to thank Rachel for allowing me to the honor of reading today. I took their poetry workshop last year, and it really kind of pushed me to crack open my own poetry and look at a lot of different ways to incorporate what I'm obsessed with, which is like ideas about monstrosity. I would do a concentration in monster studies if I could. And so, yeah, that workshop really pushed me, and I think there's a lot of questions at play in No One's Witness that kind of re-evaluate what a monster is, and the, I guess, impossibility of inhabiting like a monstrous voice, but also how we keep trying to. So this poem that I wrote is called Headlock/On Poetry. Language as stomachache. Language as madwoman polluting her own attic. Language as attic. Language as land keeping. Language as land breaking. Language as pleasure-hungry velociraptor, tricking us into its waiting mouth, as accelerator, as escape hatch, as headlock, roach-armed, tremor-veined, as blood ritual, as the water bled straight from terror, as screenshot, as gimmick, as the stranger in the window in the computer in noiseless intimacy, as dead breath, as carpool line, as what pearls and clots in utero stays waiting, stays unmade, as constellation, as consolation of power to itself of its own lineage. Language as locked, loaded kickback, as flamed chest and backwards gestures, as relocation, as reparative engine, as beloved blade beneath the pillow, as the pillow, as the way we watch her sleep, as the way we keep ourselves awake, as the way we sharpen our breaths and shovel them into the cutlery position, as molding house archiving its own dead ends, as unputdownable masochism, language as molding tree mirroring our incorrigible and ingrown hearts, as yellowing fungus that is also a life form in its own way, as decomposition, as the skull that fevers with baby grass in a catacomb under a city, as body farm, as maggot-ripe return, as green wrists sprouting thorns, as nightmare logic, as goblin, as hydra, as Medusa, as monster sulking and teething under the bed, as petulant wilderness and all the bends birthed, as your last supper warming its own gums with all the time in the world, as wishing for and against all the time in the world, as threshold pretending to be a place, as uncurled hand, as coronary artifact, as the scalpel that disjoints imagined bone structure, as a swerve, as a line shaken from its standstill, as a cleaved picket fence, palming your muscles, as an affair you can't abandon for a softer axis, even for all its tortured scenery and unfinished kisses, even for all the ways it won't ever really love you back. Language as itself, as abstraction, feral with tender fruit, as point of light-stunned pressure. Thank you.
Actual doggy poo bags.
And I use them for doggy poo.
It's symbolic. Okay, wait. Okay, so thank you so much. Thank you so much, Al, for that beautiful introduction. I'm shocked and heartened. Thank you. And to the Creative Writing Program and the Kelly Writers House for conceiving this event, and to Sofia and Airea for your sharing their brilliant energy with us. Writing this book has been a long journey, and I want to send my love and gratitude out to all the friends, family, and colleagues who have helped me bring this book into the world. Is this loud enough? Should it? Yeah, okay. Okay. Go away. Okay. So the book is quite difficult to excerpt, as I consider it something like a long poem. Each chapter of the book begins from a word from the English translation of the last 3 lines of Paul Celan's poem Ash and Glory. Translates as Ash Glory, and Niemand sucht vor den Zeugen. So Al did one translation. You said no one witnesses for the witness, and I'm using one of the jury's translations of no one bears witness for the witness. So there's many possible translations. So a surface interpretation of these 3 lines is that no one can or should bear witness for the witness, that it is impossible to bear witness to atrocity, which is a standard truism of thinking about the Nazi Holocaust. But when I first read these 3 lines long ago, I thought no one was a kind of figure, non-figure, who actually does bear witness for the witness. And this book is the culmination of my seeking to theorize no one's speech. A central figure of the book is the Musselman. It's the name given to primarily Jewish inmates of the Nazi camps who were supposedly living dead or very close to death, and who Giorgio Agamben deems were complete witnesses under because they were supposedly unable to bear witness. So Musselman means Muslim in German, and I argue that the racialized Musselman as no one does indeed bear witness for the witness under extreme subjection, but that witnessing may not be immediately intelligible in standard language forms. Alex Wehelier's book, Habeas Viscus, Racializing Assemblages, Biopolitics, and Black Feminist Theories of the Human, in which he draws the Musselman into the realm of Hortense Spiller's Black Flesh and Sylvia Wynter's New Genres of the Human, helped me to theorize Celan's Jewish Musselman as a monstrous form of life, no one becoming otherwise. And Fred Moten's and Denise Ferrer da Silva's thinking is also crucial to this book, among other Black theorists whose work explodes white Enlightenment notions of the self, man, the human, and civilization. So I'm going to read a chapter in the middle of the book. It's called No Ones. And because of the accretive and recursive nature of the book, the chapter contains echoes of what has come before in the book, some of which may not be immediately clear to you, but that's okay. Just listen and absorb, and the chapter will make its own kind of sense. And the other thing I want to say is that the book is constructed through an assemblage of quotations. And if I were to say open quote, close quote, for every quotation in the chapter, you would all want to kill me. So I'm just going to read the words and just know that they're not all mine. Most of them are not mine, or many of them are not mine. Some of them are not mine. And you can read, but they are mine in this book, in this assemblage. And you can read my fastidious citations in the book. So thank you all for listening, both in person and out there in the YouTube ether. So the chapter begins with an epigraph from Denise Ferrer da Silva. Why is it that in so many places found in every corner of the global space, so many human beings face that which no one deserves? I'm told by a native German speaker that niemand, so niemand is the first line of the 3 lines of Celan, and the translation, no one, nobody, right? I'm told by a native German speaker that niemand can be translated as something like no one who ever exists and who is present for that non-existence. Nobody is there, my German friend says, and I hear Abraham's "Here I am" call to no one, Ein Sof, the nothing that is emptiness, potential, and ash. And I hear Moten's "Nobody is there," he says, they occupy. And I hear Fanon's "I existed triply, I occupied space." And I hear Primo Levi's description of the child Herbenek. Herbenek was a nobody, a child of death, a child of Auschwitz. He looked about 3 years old. No one knew anything about him. He could not speak, and he had no name. That curious name, Herbenek, had been given to him by us, perhaps by one of the women who had interpreted with those syllables one of the inarticulate sounds that the baby let out now and again. He was paralyzed from the waist down with atrophied legs as thin as sticks, but his eyes, lost in his triangular and wasted face, flashed terribly alive, full of demand, assertion, of the will to break loose, to shatter the tomb of his dumbness. The speech he lacked, which no one had bothered to teach him, the need of speech charged his stare with explosive urgency. It was a stare both savage and human, even mature, a judgment which none of us could support. So heavy was it with force and anguish. Herbenek repeatedly utters one word, a difficult word, something like masklo, matisklo, which no one in the camp understands, even though Agamben notes they collectively speak all the languages of Europe. In the end, as Agamben notes, Herbenek's word remains obstinately secret. And Agamben rather poetically posits, perhaps this was the secret word that Levy discerned in the background noise of Celan's poetry, and yet in Auschwitz, Levy nevertheless attempted to listen to that to which no one has borne witness, to gather the secret word, masklo, matisklo. Perhaps every word, every writing is born in this sense as testimony. This is why what is borne witness to cannot already be language or writing. It can only be something to which no one has borne witness. And this is the sound that arises from the lacuna, the non-language that one speaks when one is alone, the non-language to which language answers, in which language is born. Now, the insularity of the end of that paragraph is Agamben opportunistically linking the experience of the camps to his earlier theorizing on infancy and language. But I am more interested in the sound of something to which nobody has borne witness, the non-language that no one speaks, which is the language of Celan, an obscure writing, that's Levy, that Levy considers to be an inarticulate babble, like the rattle of a dying man. Rather than waste energy countering Levy's conservative approach to poetry, let us listen to Edouard Glissant, Honor Obscurity. I openly claim the right to obscurity, which is not enclosure, apartheid, or separation. The obscure is simply renouncing the false truths of transparencies. We have suffered greatly from the transparent models of high humanity, of degrees of civilization that must be ceaselessly worked through a blinding knowledge. The transparency of the Enlightenment is finally misleading. We must reclaim the right to opacity. It is not necessary to understand someone. In the verb to understand, the French comprendre, There is the verb to take, French prendre, in order to wish to live with them. When two people stop loving, they usually say to each other, I no longer understand you, as though to love it were necessary to understand, that is, to reduce the other to transparency. Add to that a thought from an essay poet Ray Armitage writes, partly on the colonizing effects of some feminist poetics. What is the meaning of clarity? Is something clear when you understand it, or when it looms up startling you? Is readability equivalent to clarity? What is the relation of readability to convention? How might conventions of legibility enforce social codes? Perhaps we can say that the obscure and monstrous speech of no one, showing and concealing at the same time, is the breath crystal clear babble and babble of Celan's Ipano, I-I-O, and Palaksh, his thousand darknesses of murderous speech, which he travails, works, through as he breaks the German language. No one's speech operates on the periphery of language. Perhaps it is also the speech of the uncanny, when unheimlich can mean monstrous in German, creature, Oderdeck. Kafka's star-shaped sort of spool of thread, broken down remnant of no fixed abode, laughing with no lungs behind it, no body, just the rustling sound of fallen leaves. Oderdeck is the form which things assume in oblivion, claims Benjamin. Is distorted. Like Kafka's giant bug and his hunchback and his man who bows his head far down on his chest, distorted as how Fanon describes black split subjectivity in the body, the trauma-cut lesion of being constantly dissected under white eyes and existing triply in a triple person. As Slavoj Žižek, Eric Santner, and Kenneth Reinhard bluntly state, if you do not want to talk about Odradek, Gregor Samsa, and the Musselman, then shut up about your love for a neighbor. Or, speaking of background noise, if you do not want to talk about the sounds of enslaved people crossing the Atlantic or ongoing structural Black death and anti-Blackness, then shut up about the Nazi Holocaust as an exceptional event. Lisant. Since speech was forbidden, slaves camouflaged the word under the provocative intensity of the scream. No one could translate the meaning of what seemed to be nothing but a shout. It was taken to be nothing but the call of a wild animal. This is how dispossessed man organized his speech by weaving it into the apparently meaningless texture of extreme noise. An interesting passage in Wehelier's Habeas Viscus combines Elaine Scarry's description of the pre-language of torture with Frederick Douglass's memory of the sound of his Aunt Hester being assaulted and a witness description of the Musselman's idiolect. Wehelier suggests perhaps it might be more useful to construe cries and groans, heart-rending shrieks, the mechanical murmurs without content, as language that does not rely on linguistic structures, at least not primarily, to convey meaning, sense, or expression. He is countering Agamben's claim that in the camps, the impossibility of bearing witness, the lacuna that constitutes human language, collapses, giving way to a different impossibility of bearing witness, that which does not have language. Moten also theorizes a space of non-language in the break for Black subjects, that's crossed out, no things, where shriek turns speech turns song. And the Musselman, rather than just being dismissed through Agamben's and Levy's "the Muslims did not speak," has been described as using his very own jargon by constantly repeating what came to his completely confused mind. The sentences were often incomplete and were illogical, stopping abruptly at random points. Aunt Hester's and Abby Lincoln's screams, Celan's neologistic erosion of the German language, and Herbenek's and other Musselmanners' speech all operate in laboratory spaces, considering palaver or gobbledygook not as degraded forms of the standard, but rather as modes of linguistic experimentation. Moten would say, that's Moten. For Wehelier, to hear Aunt Hester's howls or the Musselman's repetition merely as pre or non-language absolves the world of man from any and all responsibility for bearing witness to the flesh. Despite his efforts to make face-to-face contact with his neighbors, Herbenek dies without being able to communicate more transparent meaning from his word. He dies, as Levy says, free but not redeemed. For Levy, nothing remains of him. He bears witness through these words of mine. And yet, Herbenek also remains what Moten would call flesh that keeps speaking, and flesh that is not asking to be redeemed. For Agamben, it is possible to understand the decisive function of the camps in the system of Nazi biopolitics. They're not merely the place of death and extermination, they are also, and above all, the site of the production of Musselman, the final biopolitical substance to be isolated in the biological continuum. Beyond the Musselman lies only the gas chamber. Agamben's torquing of Martin Heidegger's infamous reference to the camps as warehouses of the fabrication of corpses presents the Musselman of the Nazi camps as a consummate homo sacer, improbably eschatological final biopolitical substance representing mere or bare life, whose desubjectification occurs through language, experience, and the law. The Musselman is described by Levy in this way in If This Is a Man, Survival in Auschwitz. Those are two translations of a single book, If This Is a Man, Survival in Auschwitz. All the Musselmans who finished in the gas chambers have the same story, or more exactly, have no story. They followed the slope down to the bottom, like streams that run down to the sea. On their entry into the camp, through basic incapacity or by misfortune or through some banal accident, they are overcome before they can adapt themselves. They are beaten by time. They do not begin to learn German, to disentangle the infernal knot of laws and prohibitions until their body is already in decay, and nothing can save them from selections or from death by exhaustion. Their life is short, but their number is endless. They, the Musulmaner, the drowned, form the backbone of the camp, an anonymous mass, continually renewed and always identical, of non-men who march and labor in silence, the divine spark dead within them, already too empty to really suffer. One hesitates to call them living. One hesitates to call their death death, in the face of which they have no fear, as they are too tired to understand. They crowd my memory with their faceless presences, if I could enclose all the evil of our time in one image, I would choose this image which is familiar to me, an emaciated man with head dropped and shoulders curved, on whose face and whose eyes not a trace of a thought is to be seen. Interestingly, when Agamben quotes this passage, he writes faceless presence, making the Musselman a singular Heideggerian being, when Levy specifically uses the plural presences, the absent presence of no ones. Levy's title, If This Is a Man, also monstrates the limits of his conception of what constitutes life in the camps. This being the Musselman non-life, whose thought is not a thought, who has no face or story, whose death is not a death. And yet we know, following Winter and Wehelier, that there are many genres of the human and life beyond man. Agamben also attributes a racialized oriental agony to the Musselmaner on their way to the bottom, which contrasts with the lack of any other acknowledgement of racialization of the Musselmaner other than an offhand problematic line. In any case, it is certain that with a kind of ferocious irony, the Jews knew that they would not die at Auschwitz as Jews. We know that Agamben was writing remnants of Auschwitz during the Bosnian War, and he mentions camps from that war in both Homo Sacer and Means Without End, in which he extravagantly declares the camp the new biopolitical nomos of the planet. Of course, the camp is not a new concept at all. The Germans had already set up camps and conducted genocide of the Herero and Namakwa peoples in colonial German Southwest Africa in the early 1900s. And Canada and the US had set up camps and reservations for affectable, disposable indigenous people long before that. And there are many other examples. But it never occurs to Agamben to make a link between the Musselmaner and the Nazi camps and the Muslims in camps in the former Yugoslavia. To my knowledge, he has never written anything about Muslims being a disposable population in the 21st century, nor has he ever written of blackness and disposability. In fact, the only reference to blackness at all in his most recently translated book of the Homo Sacer series, The Use of Bodies, a book that opens with an extended consideration of the figure of the enslaved person, albeit only from the Greek and Roman eras, is on animal captivation as the dark jewel set in the clearing of being, the black sun shining in the open. As Wehelier rightly states, the death camps not only were aimed at extermination, they also produced a surplus, an excess, not just an absolute biopolitical substance, but the Musselman as a racial category. There can never be an absolute biopolitical substance, and racializing assemblages cannot escape the flesh. I wonder if Agamben's definition of the sovereign ban would shift in response to the US Muslim ban and attempts to ban refugees at the southern border concentration camps, two examples at the time of this writing. Alas, I'm not sure his Holocaust exceptionalism would change much. In Remnants of Auschwitz, Agamben via Levy describes a soccer match between the SS guards and the Sonderkommando, the prisoners assigned to work in the gas chambers and crematoria, as the true horror of the camp, and our shame as spectators of that match, which repeats itself in every match in our stadiums and every television broadcast in the normalcy of everyday life. If we do not succeed in understanding that match and stopping it, there will never be hope. Yet he doesn't push himself to understand that match that is never over, beyond deeming it a too simplistic gray zone where victims supposedly bleed indistinctly into their executioners, ignoring the basics of how power operates in such situations of extremity. Agamben's version of the gray zone in Homo Sacer and the inhuman in the human doesn't seem to include racialized bodies in now time, affectable nobodies who receive protection neither under a law such as habeas corpus nor under a designation, however horrifically tenuous, such as Homo Sacer. Not that these bodies necessarily desire state recognition. Ferreira da Silva writes that racial subaltern subjects are nobodies with no access to being subjects of ethical life, their affectable bodies counting only as signifiers of the horizon of death and effects of the tool of raciality, in which the state acts only in the name of its own preservation. It bears re-emphasizing that, as Wehelier states, man represents the Western configuration of the human as synonymous with the heteromasculine, white, propertied, and liberal subject that renders all those who do not conform to these characteristics as exploitable non-humans, literal, legal nobodies. Yet these nobodies have flesh. These ontological never-mans, no-ones, speak and feel and kick the ball and bear witness together as noise and song and falling up here under the ground of more and less than one. Moten. This animated urbanity in the cracks of the polis, this community sing whose improvised head reveals a tendency to get cracked in the head by the police up here under the ground where falling feels like flying because it is, and because we all fly when we fall like that, feeling each other in the space where we feel because we bear each other as differences, is where the fleshly thing you might have wanted to call a body, moving in and with and through each other in the open field we used to call everybody, populated by those abstract equivalences we call anybody, is given in its most essential form, which is nothing other than that ongoing giving of form that we call the informal refuge for the no ones, the not ones, the more plus less than ones, the nuns, who are in their constantly novitiate-based communitarian devotion, nobodies. Okay, I'm going to read a study. And just a note, there's an intertext from the video soundtrack of the piece that I'm talking about in this study. Study, June 17th, 2008. A figure in orange jumpsuit, shackles, black hood, and black gloves shuffles slowly through Manhattan's midtown in the midday sun. I donned a surface, my ornaments became the negative matter of the state. Seemingly unraced, ungendered, and defaced, the figure nonetheless gestures toward the look of a Guantanamo Bay detainee, an unlawful enemy combatant with no recourse to habeas corpus, that is temporary and abundant, something that waits, and who is subject to torture while we don't wait but forget. As the representation of Homo Sacer continues to shuffle silently along the pavement past the glass houses of commerce, the video poem soundtrack invokes Charles Baudelaire and Ivan Chechklov on the Flaneur and the Dérive, and Herodotus and Sappho and the Guantanamo secret detainee interrogation logs, and a pamphlet called Interested in Knowing More About Islam, and Vito Conci. I started following people because I had the desire to be nobody. I was erasing myself, and then suddenly my body became the center of attention. Through the enforced framing of the camera, we are watching the orange figure in the video, but on the busy street, people mostly ignore or look through the figure, a hauntological ghost watching the crowd, entering another person whenever it wished. Indeed, at one point, people look away from the figure toward the naked cowboy. Oh, that's just the worst, that's hysterical. And my nostalgic lesbian brain thinks of how Audre Lorde criticizes that effective stance of looking away from another's feelings in her essay, Uses of the Erotic is Power, using a person like Kleenex and throwing them away. In this case, into a cage that a few chickens might fit inside. A cage that Muhammad Ahmed Abdullah Saleh al-Hanashi, the Yemeni man in Halpern's Commonplace, lived and breathed in until he didn't. I am disturbed that everyone was talking, and he was left there all alone. In an essay on the performance and its linked video poem, Stock, Laura Elric, the white artist, poet, and figure in the orange jumpsuit, calls the silent figure a migrating void, a nothing, that is simultaneously an aperture of sight, an absent presence, and it. She draws from Judith Butler's essay, Torture and the Ethics of Photography, on the Abu Ghraib prison debacle, during which invisible U.S. military torture practices were made all too visible, to comment on how the state restricts any witnessing of the Guantanamo Bay detainees or their prison conditions. The state works on the field of perception and more generally the field of representability in order to control affect, in anticipation of the way affect is not only structured by interpretation, but structures interpretation as well. What is at stake is the regulation of those images that might galvanize political opposition to a war. The community of witnesses watching the performance or the video or both are caught up in a complicity of seeing an affective disturbance, even when we look away from the hauntological orange figure. Elric suggests that perhaps this orange figure could be the gash in the collective bodily form that we look through to see the contours of past histories of trauma that continue to shape this pseudo-rational national space. Its absent present asks how we might begin to sense the historical present, and as answer, the abject, slightly inhuman body, both as bright as a target and acting as a musculature of vision, draws into focus precisely the underside or the otherwise familiar everyday public space. A figure distorted like Odradek, like Oblivion, or like Fanon's body and the black bodies in multicolored jumpsuits in the US prison industrial complex where Jim Crow and the white hoods never left. Elric asks, is the foreclosure of recognition enabled by peripheral vision in fact a kind of looking in which one sees, but only peripherally, in order that no thing may return one's look? Moten might say the kind of looking Elric describes cannot be sustained as unalloyed looking, but must be accompanied by listening. And in fact, Elric deliberately reverses a quotation from George Simmel on seeing and hearing in the video soundtrack, in which she says, "Someone who hears without seeing is much more uneasy than someone who sees without hearing." The original Simmel line, as quoted by Benjamin in the Arcades Project, is, "Therefore the one who sees without hearing is much more worried than the one who hears without seeing." I would argue with Moten that all the senses accompanying one another synesthetically is a more fruitful proposition than a binary relation, especially fruitful when accompanied by some kind of response ability. Elric is influenced by 1970s and later feminist performance art by Yoko Ono, Marina Abramovich, and others, in which the performer places their body in abject situations, vulnerable to attack, in an effort to literalize some of the psychic and physical violences certain marked bodies face daily. Elric did not experience attack during her two-hour performance, but perhaps she could have, and she uses what Butler calls the mobilizing power of injury to challenge viewers not to deny what can't be seen, but rather to experience, to see and feel and listen to, a whole punctured through this more plus less than single plus third or more figure, it. In the video poem, the narrator asks, "Can you see that my hair's blonde through it in the sunlight?" And I wonder how this performance would change if a brown or black person were doing it, how the threat of injury would be exponentially higher, as it is for Dred Scott shuffling down the street with his iconic sign, or as we shall see for Banu Kapil lying or laying down in the site of Jyoti Singh Pandey's rape and murder. A threat of injury Sharon Hayes also doesn't seem to face, even when questioned by police during her performance. Elric's gesture of publicly performing a negation of the self, her emptying of her white author function while wearing the uniform of the all-too-fungible brown and black detainee, does seem to resonate on a different register from Halpern's narrator's fraught imaginary relation to his detainee. Elric's gesture does not seem to be about the onanistic one, nor do I think it is about the secondary or proxy witness or the prosopopoic act of taking on or putting back the face of the other or the dead in a form of empathic identification. Elric, as a kind of it or no one, does not bear witness for the detainee. Rather, she enacts a defaced positionality that forces viewers and listeners to generate responsibility for our complicit, folded together, non-witnessing of state-sanctioned torture under racial capitalism and empire, mobilizing affects that stick to us and may provoke action. As Harney and Moten remind us, what one might call the social life of things is important only insofar as it allows us to imagine that social life is not a relation between things, but is rather that field of rub and rupture that works, that is the work of no one, nothing, in its empathic richness. In the middle of Manhattan, Elric places the constitutive outside of US freedoms back in the heart of the cycles of work, consumption, and leisure to which it is tied, and draws a community of witnesses toward fleshly empathy. I am the natural role for the public square. I calmly recognize there's a ghost before me. I go to see and listen to a vast and dangerous perhaps. Thank you.
Let's all give another round of applause for Rachel, please.
Do I have to go close to it?
So I guess I should start by saying I had seen. Perfect. I'd seen the book in various forms before its final form. And each read, as Al said, I got something different from the book. Every time I went back to the book, I found something that drew me in or drew me out, not of the text itself, but drew out some part of me that needed to come out. In the book, readers are presented with several perspectives about identity, all of which have some theoretical common threads, from Deleuze and Guattari's becoming and virtuality, Moten's consent not to be a single being, De Silva's concept of no bodies and difference without separability. Throughout each chapter as a reader, I found myself journeying toward an understanding of what it means to be a no one, to live as a no one. It was almost aspirational, to be quite frank. And I came to my own conclusion about what a no one is, without being didactically led by the text, because that's clearly not your intention. So I think whenever you find another reader of this text, you can always ask them, who to you is no one? So I ask you, who to you is no one?
Ah, interesting. Because I'm going to ask you, who to you is no one. So maybe can we start with that? Because you're talking about being drawn out, and that's the point of the text. I mean, I will say stuff, but I'm curious what you think no one is.
No one is everyone who is able to shed the ego of self, able to shed the veneer of specialness, right? It feels to me that's very much what the plenum is about, coming together. It's trying to find commonality across difference, which is an open invitation to any of us. But one has to be brave enough to accept that invitation to no oneness, because there's a paradox in there. You know, everyone wants to be someone, but what if the world asks you to be no one so that you can be somebody? And so, to me, I think it's an invitation to everyone to be no one, and that you can aspire to be no one.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
But you'd have to put away some preconceived notions about what no oneness is, what it means to be somebody.
Totally, yeah. I mean, you got it there. I mean, that's, for me, like the book's a try, and I do the essay, right? The essay as a try, and I do multiple iterations of what no one could perhaps be. And I was thinking, like, the previous title of the book was A Language No One Speaks, A Dangerous, Perhaps a Monstrous Witness. Mm-hmm. And then the press wanted it shortened, so. So for me, that the perhaps is really important, is like a really important notion. And for me, it's from Derrida, and his use of the peut-être in French means, could be, maybe, a possibility, by chance. And so for me, both the dangerous perhaps and the monster are kind of ways into thinking of this no one, non-figure, thinking of what it could be, maybe. So when I think of monstrosity, and even like the peut-être, I think of it as a kind of radical force. Like, so in similar ways, I think of the poetic as a radical excessive force, as kind of perverted. Okay, so I think of the no one's a pervert. Okay, so the no one is like, and I think of blackness as an excessive, perverted force. Just and that's through Moten and Ferreira da Silva and Laura Harris and other people. So what the monster? So why I was drawn to the monster? I don't even remember how I was drawn to the monster, but. How did I even get to the monster? It's interesting. Sorry, I've been working on this book for 10 years. I don't even remember the fucking book, so I'm doing the best I can. So the monster for me, I'm very Derridian, so I'm all about an etymology. So for the monster, it's got all these roots, right, with, there's one of the roots, I won't get into all the Latin, but anyway, one of the roots is like, the portent, like an evil, like a possible evil, but there's also the miraculous is in it, and this disruptive force, this excessive force this perverted force that I'm talking about, and it also has, it's like a warning. That's another root, but for me, I was also really interested in this showing and pointing. I know it's kind of weird. I have a weird brain, and that's what the book is like a kind of imprint of my weird associative brain. So I just go along lots of associative paths, but the showing and pointing is just really important to me in terms of how I write. So I write through gathering materials together and placing them in relation. But anyway, so that's what the showing and pointing was. And then there's another route that's about thinking with. So that's like the Indo-European, the Proto-Indo-European route. Anyway, so for me, there's just a lot of, I haven't even got into all the monster right now, but what I'm hinting at is this the possibility, the peut-être, this it's like I guess for me, to take from quote Ferreira da Silva, it's like a guide for the imagination, the no one, or a way of thinking otherwise. Like I don't want to say it's just like a thought, a thought experiment. I don't think of my book as just a thought experiment. I really am. I'm really invested. Psychically in the book. Yeah. It's not just in my head, it's in my body. So I can't tell you what no one is. Like for me, I go in a lot about like it's like a hauntological or a para-ontological or para-onto-epistemological, like and I don't want to sound all like highfalutin there, but I just mean it's like a being that is like, so para means, and this is through, Moten and Nahum Chandler, as like para means like both against and alongside, like I whatever, I'm into etymology, but so it's not a being, it's a becoming. So that's where the relation with Ferreira da Silva is really important. And so to go more down to ground is like, if you just look at no one and you say no to the one, right? You say no to individuation, you say no to the self, you say no to the atomization that has got us to this place, right? Where we are in this world of racial capitalist empire, right? So how do we say no to the one, right? How do we say no to the one? How do we I don't even need to repeat what you said, because you had a beautiful way of describing who the no one was. So, yeah. So help that? Does that help? Or?
That's very helpful.
Okay.
I think what I'm taking away is this idea of becoming otherwise. And so I texted you this past weekend, and I said to you, I think I'm going to stop calling myself a poet and call myself a poethicist.
Right.
And that came from the opening chapter in which you wrote, "A poetics thickened by an H launches an exploration of art's significance as not just about a form of living in the real world," which strongly suggests that poethics rather than poetics was kind of an undergirding principle in the book. So I was wondering if you could talk about the difference between the two approaches and how does poethics continue to influence you? I'm fascinated by that.
Yeah, so what you're quoting is actually not me, it's Joan Rotalick, the great Joan Rotalick, who wrote The Poetical Wager, whom I'm sure a number of us in this audience are very influenced by. And yeah, so I was really, I've always been influenced by poetics, the way Joan talks about it. I'll just talk a little bit about poetics first, which is, so I was really interested in the book about how Denise Ferreira da Silva took up poetics. So Joan, both of them are have a science background or are interested in chaos theory and like neurophysicists. So they are using notions from quantum physics to theorize. So anyway, just a base for Joan is like talking about a complex realism and a kind of writing that is open to the reader and open to chance, right? Like chaos theory, like open to chaos. And I'm just really fascinated by how Denise Ferreira da Silva ended up taking up Joan's term, or I shouldn't own the term, but she coined the term, into a Black feminist poetics of the plenum. And so that was really important to me for the book. And so for her, for da Silva, it was about like an ethics without the subject, so both with and outside the subject, and her amazing notion of the plenum, which is, really important to the book, which is that we're like, through quantum physics, we're through particality, right? We are all always already connected, and we are all part of each other already. Do you know, like every little, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the basis for her thinking, like her of how to undo what we're in, right? The subject, the object, right? So the commodity, right? Is if you can change the way we think about how we relate, then you can change these stratified notions of self and other, object, right? And so the problem for me is that I don't know. I'm a weird person. I have a weird thinker. But I'm a very Jewish thinker, even though I'm not religious at all. So I'm very like questioning whatever, and I'm very influenced by certain Jewish thought, and we could talk, whatever. But one thing, and so, I used to be like, I'm getting somewhere. I used to be really influenced by like Emmanuel Levinas's notions of ethics. So, which are quite beautiful and poetic, around the face of the other and the call of the other, the caress of the other taking you hostage, and this kind of, it's this transcendental relationship between the self and other. Mm-hmm. But then, like, I read his opinions on Palestinians and the so-called Afro-Asiatic hordes, and his opinions on women. It's like, I don't know. I think I have this in my bio somewhere, like ethics founders on the shoals of the political, and like I guess, and Moan's really helped me think of it more as like founders on the shoals of the social. It's like the social more than the political. The political has all its baggage. So I'm just like against ethics. Like I can't do ethics. So for them it's poetry and ethics. So mixed. But for me, I couldn't go there. I can't put in my title, but I honor it. Like I honor that they honor it. So right. I hope that makes sense.
It does make sense.
Yeah. Sorry.
It does make sense. I'm going to ask one more question before I open it up to the group to ask a question. Of the many things you can't help but notice in No One's Witness is how form enacts a future possibility. Each chapter, as you said earlier, is titled with a singular word from the last 3 lines of Celan's Ashen Glory. A thoughtful syntactical move, since each, by various degrees, launches a different interrogation into the concept of no one and witness. The book, as you said, reads as an assemblage, almost like a pastiche, where it is, in fact, enacting a future, the plenum, through the form. So I'm wondering if you can give us some thoughts about how form might hold a future possibility, how we can use form to enact the future.
Yeah, we were just kind of talking about this yesterday in class a bit, as form as a kind of form as an activity, like I don't really have a definition of form. You didn't ask me for one, sorry, but that yeah. Anyway, I won't get into form, but so in terms of futurity, I mean, okay, so I'm very whatever Jewy or whatever, but I'm very influenced by Benjamin's notion of the, you know, of the assemblage, or how he creates, Walter Benjamin, sorry, how he creates assemblages in his writing, or particularly in the Arcades Project. But the way he talks about it, I quote this in the book, where he talks about literary montage. And he says, what does he say? I don't need to purloin any valuables. I just need to show. Like, so this is my thing with the monstrate, right? The monster, the showing and pointing. I just need to present. But for him, this is like a radical, like, I don't know. And again, this is my own interpretation, because like this is the thing. I ain't a scholar. I'm a fucking poet, so I can do what I want, you know. So for me, this is my interpretation of Benjamin. Okay, so fuck you all if you're gonna like, you know, contradict me and you're gonna ask me all your crazy questions, whatever. But for me, so for Benjamin, this act of literary montage, of being a rag picker and jamming shit together, is enacts something like monstrous. Like, so it enacts. So for him, it's like the dialectical image. I like to go towards Yetzite. This notion of now time. So sorry, I'm getting to the future. So it's a messianic. So this is a Jewy thing. I'm really interested in the messianism without content. Like the simple way to say it is like Benjamin talks about every second of time is a straight gate through which the Messiah might enter. Right. So what does that mean? It means that you got to be ready or whatever, or you got to act now. Like, you know, it's. In my mind, I link that to the Yetzite, these moments of eruptive force, these excessive para-ontological excessive moments, right? The monstrous moment, the black moment, the poetic moment, like these things that fuck you up. Like they, you know, so in my mind, in form, I am both influenced by him, and I'm guessing he's also influenced by Russian formalism. So the filmic idea of the montage shock effect, right? So from 1920s, Eisenstein, whatever, like the jump cut as a form of waking up. Well, I don't want to use wake, but you know what I mean. Wake, like through a constellation of unlike images, right? Of juxtaposition and disjunction, and it like wakes you up. It like, you know, and all my practice is kind of about that, like trying to create moments in language where the reader is like shocked. I hate to admit it, but it's kind of true. It's just, sometimes I'll like keep the flow going, and then I'll shock you. You know, like what's this something like totally unintelligible. And this goes back to like Joan and Poetics, like talking about the unintelligible as form, as a way of living. So she talks about Poetics as an ethos, like a way of living, right? So that poetry is a way of life, is like a form. So in my associative brain, and all the different ways I talk about in the book of form of life, and a life, right? I want something fucking different than the self, the one, man, the human, all the white Enlightenment stuff that has brought us to this place. So, and along with Denise Ferreira da Silva, I think of these sites of possibility as beyond space time. So I'm weird in that way. I don't really think of time. Like I don't think of like Yetzite, like now time, the way I understand it is like it's always constantly disrupting the now. Like the future is now, like, in the past, our past traumas are always erupting to disrupt us and disrupt the future. So I don't know. That's kind of does that kind of answer your question?
Absolutely.
Sorry, though.
Absolutely.
I hate mosquitoes. They love me, mosquitoes.
My favorite part is listening to you talk, actually.
Yeah.
I really enjoy it. I really do. I want to open it up for other folks to ask questions. I know that you aren't mic'd, but if you might project so that I can hear you and ask the question to Rachel, that would be very helpful. Yes. Yeah, black hat.
Hi.
Is it black? I'm sorry. Or blue? Navy
Hi.
blue. Sorry.
Hi, Julian. Hi.
Thank you. Well, forgive me because I haven't read the book yet.
Okay.
But it occurred to me that because you said you were interested in etymology, the word witness comes from wita, Old English meaning to know. So that witness might be perhaps about like knowing and understanding rather than seeing.
Hmm.
And when you had asked the question about like what is no one thing I thought of was that a no one or a type of no one is one who is not witnessed.
One who is not witnessed.
And I wondered what you thought about that.
Did you say not witnessed?
Not
ED.
witnessed.
Yes. In the sense of maybe the etymological sense of not being known or understood rather than simply not being seen. But maybe it can mean that as well. So no one as one who is not witnessed.
Huh. Yeah, I'd like you to read the book and then we ask that because I kind of don't go in that direction. I kind of think of. But can I answer slant? Is that okay?
Oh yeah, no, I'm just
Yeah.
curious what you thought of the idea. Whatever comes to your mind will be interesting.
No, because when you said that about the etymology, I totally forgot when you asked that question is of the etymology of testimony. So witness and testimony. So I was gonna say before about like the book used to be about the third. So terstis is one of so testimony has balls like male balls or whatever, right? Testes as a root, and it also has terstis, the third, as another root, and also auctor, the author, also has a witnessing root too. And what did you say Waitan was?
The Old English verb viton
Yeah.
means to know.
To know, yeah.
That's where witness comes from, I think. But also the word wit.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm kind of a little bit against knowledge, like I'm kind of into unknowing, but what I was gonna say, I just want to go a little slant around the third because the book used to be about the third. Like that's how I got stuck. Is like so, I got stuck in trying to undo the Levinas 1-2 punch of transcendental subjectivity. You know, the ethics. With the third, and so he talks about it as a third party who enters and disrupts the two, right? But he doesn't take it any like so. Like he talks about it as the neighbor, but in an interview, that's where he undoes himself by saying the Palestinian is not a neighbor. Like and so I wrote a whole book, The Neighbor Procedure, about this because, like, I was like so angry about that. Anyway, so but the third party. Anyway, that was what the book was about. Was thinking of the no one as like a third figure, outside of this 1-2 punch. But then Fred really helped me just think beyond that to like beyond beyond numeracy, you know. And that's like he has this beautiful concept of more plus less than one. And so what I did is I put that more plus less than one plus 3 or more as this kind of basically enumerable thing, right? It's not one. It's less than one and more than one, but it's also 3 or more, and but yeah, it literally wasn't until I started I just reached a limit with the kind of thinking that had been done up to that point in Holocaust studies on extreme subjectivity, and you know I just. You know, many years ago, I just had to stop. I just stopped reading the Celan scholarship years ago and Holocaust studies and trauma. You know, anyway, I write about this in the book. But it was Black studies with its basically like blowing up of you know white Western Enlightenment notions, right? Like and thinking otherwise, about becoming otherwise. It's always already becoming and the social as as the site of everything. That was the turn for me. So, and so that's when you talked before about form. That's part of that was just the key moment for me into creating the assemblage. Like the assemblage, like if you think about like study, right, in the ways that Harney and Moten talk about it, like study is about getting together with others and thinking differently and undoing knowledge as it's often done in places like here, like the academy. And for me, because I'm like an introvert and I just make work by gathering assemblages together in a kind of like fractal thinking, as Freire de Silva talks about. Thinking, I did it on the page. You know what I mean? I did that kind of study on the page of thinking with, of creating, creating these. Like I even avoid talking about witnessing. Sorry, like it's just like it's a way in. Like I don't have a definition for witnessing. Like I can't stand the poetry of witness, and I don't define the poetics of witness because I don't really care. I care more about the no one, in this book, which is, as Fred said to me once, the no one. I can't remember exactly what he said, but it's like, the no one could just be nothing, and I'm like, yeah, like it could just mean nothing. My whole book could be nothing. I'm like, yeah, you know what I mean? Like. Yeah, it's true. So, sorry, that was, I don't know. I know I didn't answer your question, Julia, but I appreciate it.
No, I'm just interested in the discussion.
Thank you just so much for coming, too.
Other questions? In the far back, tan jacket.
Hi.
Hello.
I'm Nicole. I'm a student from Sportsmore, and the lovely Sofia Sears invited me and my friends. So we're
Nice.
here. Thank you for everything. Our brains are exploding, but I was really intrigued by the way you described monstrosity and protect. I was wondering what is protect, and then also you describe it as like a monstrous, you describe monstrosity as being a radical force, and you also talk about monstrosity being a perverse force. So I guess one, I don't know what protect is, and sorry, protect.
Oh, sorry.
You're mentioning, and then what do you mean by like monstrosity being radical and perverse? And then you also mentioned that in the same way that monstrosity is radical and perverse, blackness is radical and perverse. So I was curious more about what you meant by that. If you wouldn't mind sharing.
Okay. Do you want me to translate that?
Do you want me to translate
the
it?
question? You go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, so monstrosity as both radical and perverse, what does that mean exactly? More importantly, what does it mean as it relates to blackness?
Yeah, and I think they also asked about the peut-être, right? You asked
Yep.
about the peut-être? Yeah. So sorry, I should have went slower there. So put, gotta hold your P's back on these mics. So peut-être is it's French for could be. So être means to be, and peut-être. And Jacques Derrida uses that term a lot in his writing, and I'm very influenced by it as it's the perhaps, okay? So it's related to time and being, right, and becoming, okay? Because, right, something could happen in the future, peut-être, it might happen, right? And it's also peut-être, could be. There's a possibility of being. And in the book, I also, Nietzsche talks about the dangerous perhaps. And I don't know if Derrida takes it up, but I was really interested in that. And that I put them together. I end up putting Derrida with Nietzsche. So I ranted on before, so I don't want to repeat too much. That about, oh God, how do you explain? How do I explain what I'm talking? When I'm talking about like these, like, remember I talked about like the montage shock effect. So I'll give you an example. Like, this isn't like really what I think, but it's like just a quick example. Like in like a Russian formalist film, you could have like, you have a shot of a crowd scene, on the steps, huge crowd scene, like a revolutionary scene, right? And rah, 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 and then cut, like a cut without a dissolve, like it's a hard cut to like an interior space with like a woman baking or whatever. I haven't watched these films in a long time. I'm making it up right now, okay? And I did make it up in class yesterday too. So it's and the jamming together of the two very dissonant, different images creates a shock effect. Okay, is what they termed it. And for me, I think of these aspects of form as eruptive. Do you know what I'm saying? Like as an audience member, there's something eruptive that happens in that. Like there's something that shocks you into awareness or whatever, if you want to be basic about it, like consciousness, like a kind of higher, like not higher, a consciousness. Okay, so and in the roots of the monster, or even the notion of the monster is an assemblage, right, of many different parts. The monster is a lot. The monster is queer. The monster goes throughout. The monster is huge. I could have done the whole book on the monster, but I just hint at all the different things. So the monster itself, as I said, through its root, is like an atrocity, a marvel, a portent. But also in that is a disruptive force, like something that disrupts the norm. Do you know what I'm saying? Like what? So like the monster comes and it's a surprise. The monster shows us something that we didn't see before, And so to slide to blackness, it's just it's something that Fred Moten talks about in different ways. He doesn't. I mean. He talks about blackness as a kind of like constant difference, constantly producing difference, like constantly just basically out of reach, fugitive. And I'm talking, and this is blackness as not necessarily about black people in his thinking. Okay, so it's just what it's linked to. For De Silva talking about nobodies, it's just this I don't know how to explain it. And it's the same with poetry. It's like the possibility. There's a possibility of different ways of thinking about becoming, different ways of being in the world. Okay, different forms of life, different ways of living. That is enacted within theories of blackness. So you kind of would have to read a bit more of it. So am I going on too long?
No, I
Okay.
put the mic
Is that
up to my
okay?
lips
Yeah, all right.
simply to say that we have time for one more question.
Oh, okay.
And I would add resistance to essentialization, essentially.
Totally,
You know,
yeah.
like how does the monster or whatever, the monstrosity, that which is radical and perverse, elude
the grasp of the law.
Exactly.
And the norm.
Exactly.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. One more question. Yes, the only person with their hand up. Please
Yeah.
stand up. Hello, welcome.
Hey, Atlanta. So I wanted to ask, so it seems like you're using the figures in no one and you're talking about this like extreme subjection, like this figure is extremely subjected, they're racialized, they're experiencing a lot of violence, and I'm wondering if this figure is also a possibility and like it's supposed to be like, it feels like it's a loop that like ended on like, I don't know, is there a way that romanticizing that just reaffirms subjectivity as like a violent difference?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's why it's like so hard to like sum anything up, like in the answer to a question or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I'm quite influenced in how Ouhelie talks about the Muslim and flesh in his book. As these fugitive forms. So the no one is not, in my mind, or as I try to unfold in the book, is not just a form of, so when I talk about extreme subjection, it's in the context of the Muslim of the camps and the way blackness in the afterlives of slavery is figured. So, in slavery and its afterlives. But in most of the thinking that I'm doing and that I'm influenced by is taking these designations or forms of talking about extreme subjection and exploding them. So like Airea talks about the flesh. So the flesh as this force. So again, it's a radical force. So the flesh is also is pained and he draws on like Spiller's hieroglyphics of the flesh. The flesh transfers across, the marks of the flesh transfer across generations as a wounded continuance, and the flesh there's a part of the flesh that escapes any kind of that escapes the whips and chains. There's a flesh that is a fugitive form of life. Do you know what I mean? It's not like not like a particular flesh, like flesh as a concept. So it's a beautiful. There's this beautiful. It's both and. Do you know what I mean? And those are the kind of concepts I'm interested in. And they're kind of limit concepts, and I all my work is kind of about limit concepts, so that the limit is. You reach the limit of thought on it, but then the limit becomes a threshold to something else. And it's both and. It's not like I go to like this place of hope and that's the only place to go. Do you know what I mean? And it's not like I'm going to the place of horror and that's the only place to go. It's all of it. Does that help or?
Yeah, that helps.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being here.
Thank you.
Another round of applause for Rachel.
Thank you, everyone. There are some food items back there. We ask that everyone be thoughtful about giving each other some space and masks and all of that. But you can spread out now and eat some food. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Airea. That was amazing.
Thank you. Thanks so much.